Hi, my name is Joseph R. Lewis, and I write adventures. And today I'd like to talk about a very important aspect of adventure design, which is player choice. And how do we encourage and enable players to make meaningful decisions in our adventures? Um, and this ties into how we make adventures non-linear and also how we make things more interactive. So, to discuss this topic, I've divided up into two categories, which are physical choices and social choices. Physical choices are exactly what you think they are. They are ways to move around your environment and interact with the environment physically. So, the first aspect of physical choices that I think are meaningful and important to include are navigation, which can be as simple as when you walk into a room, there should be multiple doors. Of course, not every room, but as often as possible, as often as makes sense. The player should be able to see multiple paths forward. It doesn't have to be doors, obviously, and they should be able to make meaningful choices. In order to make those choices meaningful about how you navigate a space, the players need to have information about what is different between these paths or options or doors. And then when they go through these doors or pick a path, there needs to be something different on the other side. So, for example, if the players walk into a room that you've written, you can describe there's a door on the east wall and there is smoke coming out from underneath. And there's a window on the west wall, and the sun is glaring through. And there's a vent on the north wall, and it smells like flowers. So now the players can go to each of these things. They can investigate, they can listen, they can smell, whatever it may be, and they can make an informed decision about which way they want to go. They could say, well, the smoke seems risky. There could be fire. Let's not go that way. Or they may say, earlier we encountered smoke and it had some important magical element or effect. Let's go follow this smoke because we are interested and see if it has a similar effect. So, in that way, as they move forward through your dungeon space or your adventure space, they can use previously learned information to make informed decisions um, that allow them to be proactive and to be in control of the situation and to feel good that they've made informed choices and they are pursuing the goals that they want to pursue. Or they're, in the opposite direction. They hear a sound or they smell a smell and they don't know what it is and they are nervous or apprehensive in some way. So they make the choice to not go in that direction until they learn more, which again is very valid and important. But in order to have those choices, we need to give the players multiple paths and make sure that they have information about those paths. And then when they pursue those paths, if they go through the smoky door, there should be smoke of some kind. You should have the next room or the next area. The smoke should be an important element in some way. Something is smoking, and they can interact with that and investigate that. Likewise, if they hear a ticking sound and they open that door, there should be a machine of some kind. Something's making the ticking sound. So you need to telegraph what's behind your doors or down your paths, have them be different. And then this allows the players to make informed and meaningful navigational choices about how to move about the physical space of your adventure. Another type of meaningful physical choice or way to interact with a space is through some kind of device that is inside the room that the players can interact with, and this has a meaningful effect. So this could be literally a machine that has levers or buttons, multiple switches, chains they can pull on, wheels they can spin, things they can physically interact with. Or they could be magical. You press on the glowing gem and it does something. But again, the players should be able to discern that there are different options. So maybe the levers are made of different materials. Maybe they're of different sizes. Maybe one is hot, one is cold. Things like that. So the players should be able to, once they've discerned what the differences are, they should be able to say to the GM, "I want to pull the hot lever," or I want to push the red button. They should be easily discerned from each other. You do not want to give the players identical looking things to interact with. Then it's hard for them to communicate. No, I meant the third one, not the fourth one. They're all the same. And this also leads into the problem of dealing with the effect. What happens when they interact with this device or this machine or this magic object? They should be able to say, well, we pushed the red button and we heard a sound off to the right. So then we went into the right room and something red was happening. There was a red fluid pouring down or a red light was blinking or something. They should be able to very quickly and easily figure out what the machine is doing, even if it's complex, if it reaches across a large distance. The danger here, the thing we're trying to avoid, is where they walk into a room and there's one button and it's in no way labeled or described or unique. They interact with that button, that switch, that device, and they don't see any kind of effect. They can't hear or see or smell that anything has happened. So they don't know what they've done. And then the problem, the most dangerous problem, is that you've hidden the effect too far away. It's way off screen, it's multiple rooms away. So then when the players get there, which remember, the players may not get there until 3, 4, 5 weeks later in game time. This may take many sessions before they to reach this effect in actual gameplay. So if I'm a player and it's been 5 weeks since I pushed the button in room 5, and now I'm in room 27 and there's water pouring through a hole in the ceiling, it's very unlikely that I'm going to remember that I pushed the button and that it had any effect to open the aperture that made the waterfall, and that this is important in some way. I'm not going to be able to put those things together. I'm not going to have that information. On the other hand, if there were 3 buttons and one was green and red and blue, and then eventually I get to room 27 and there's a big red aperture in the ceiling and red water's coming through, maybe I could put that together. If they're too far apart and it's been too long in time, I may not be able to do that. And I think that's poor design. I think the players should know what they're interacting with in terms of, if it's a different color or a size or a temperature or something. Um, and then they should be able to intuit or discern or deduce what the effect was, where it came from, where to go and see it, so that they can begin to put the pieces of this puzzle together that you've created for them. And they can say, oh, these buttons control these elements. We want to arrange these to be, this should be on and this should be off, and that'll allow us to open the door and whatever it may be. And that's a meaningful choice, and they can manipulate these things to create the desired effect that they want. They want to go this way, so they need to, drain the room of acid or whatever it may be. But they need to be able to figure out the relationship between the device that they're interacting with and the effect that it's creating in your adventure space. So that is meaningful, but it also needs to be telegraphed, and it needs to be somewhat compressed in time and space so they can figure out how the device works. The third physical element that players can interact with that makes an adventure non-linear and gives them more agency are dangers. The dangers that are present throughout the adventure space or in the room that the players can interact with. Um, this means that the dangers, like everything else, they need to be visible or sensible. They need to be able to see that there's a trap or a monster or whatever it may be, um, so that they can begin thinking of a plan. How am I going to interact with it? How am I going to avoid it? How am I going to overcome this obstacle? And those are choices that should be available. It shouldn't just be there's one way to defeat this enemy or to avoid this trap. Uh, we should be giving the players tools, and those tools can be very random. Here's a rope, and here's a ladder, and here's a rock, and here's a bear trap that's right in your path. Maybe they find a way around it, or over it, or they set it off. Maybe they lure a monster into it. They should have all of these options. This makes the adventure more unique to them, as their choices have impact on how it changes the game space. But in order to do that, we as the adventure writer, we need to make those dangers, again, visible or detectable. We don't want to hide things because you can't make decisions about something you have no information about. So whatever the danger is, whether it's a trap or a creature or some other environmental danger, it should be detectable, so that the players can start making decisions and plans and choices about how to deal with it and overcome it. In connection to that, we also want to give them a reason to try to overcome this obstacle, which means usually there has to be some kind of visible reward. Like, there's a magic gem glowing on the other side of the trap. So now I want to get across the trap so I can get the reward. If there's no reward and I just see a trap, I'll think, maybe let's not go this way and let's go somewhere else. And instead of giving them something to overcome, you've just given them a reason to not engage with that adventure space. And I've played with a lot of players who are cautious and sensible. And if they see a danger without a reward, they'll say, well, let's not interact with that danger and take risks if there's no reason, if there's no benefit to us. So your dangers should be, again, detectable, and have a reward that entices them to interact with it. And the danger should be comprehensible. I mentioned a bear trap a moment ago. A bear trap is something that we all understand in real life. We know vaguely how it works. We know what the danger is of what it will do. Obviously, in a fantasy adventure or a sci-fi adventure, the trap or the monster could be very bizarre and something that we've never seen before in real life. But you still need to telegraph in some way how it might work, what might set it off, and what the effect might be. One way to do that is to scatter around the remnants of people who failed to overcome this danger. So if there's an acid trap of some kind, there are the decayed and mushy remains of some bones. Um, or if it's a fire trap, then there are some scorch marks, whatever it may be. But again, you should telegraph to the players how things work, what the danger might be, so they can make informed choices in overcoming or navigating around or defeating the obstacles you've created. And those, I think, are the major types of physical choices that we can build into our adventures. Navigational, how to move about the space; devices, things they can interact with to change the space; and dangers, things they need to overcome in order to get rewards and move forward. The second category of things that we can build into our adventures to create player choices and options are social choices. And I've divided these up into victims, villains, and vendors because things should come in threes, and V is a cool letter. So, victims obviously are NPCs, people who the players will see are in danger and need help. So they could be, the victims of violence. They could be trapped in some way. They could be prisoners. They could be suffering from a disease. They could come up and say, "Oh, my son was kidnapped by the villain. Go help him on my behalf." And the major choice, usually in interacting with a victim of some sort, is the players can either help them or ignore them. Usually, um, and obviously, helping means the players are then going to put themselves at a little bit of risk or a lot of risk and use up their resources in order to help the victim in some way. And usually, there should be some kind of upside that helping this person, hopefully, they can see that this is a good person that we're helping, and it makes the world a better place if we help them. Um, Maybe there's a material reward. Maybe we're saving someone from the dungeon, and in near the dungeon is the vault, and we can rob the vault while we're saving someone from the dungeon. Maybe those are good choices. Um, uh, and then the flip side may be we're going to ignore this victim. Maybe we think they're lying. Maybe we think this is a trap. Maybe we don't see a way to help them. It seems impossible. We can't rescue someone from your burning tower because we are three level one adventurers and we have no way of doing that. So maybe we feel bad about that, but we thought about it and we engaged with the problem. Maybe we're going to go find someone else who can help. Those are choices. That's good. And either way, there will be a result and an outcome. We'll talk about consequences in a minute. The second type of social choice is a villain interaction. So usually the villain, again, this is an NPC or a monster or something that we see doing something bad in a bubble. So whether or not they're hurting a person, they're destroying a structure, they're engaged in something that the players find repugnant or gross, and the players then have the choice of, do we go over and interact with this person to stop them in some way? And we're going to have a conflict with this person. And again, there should be some clear choices and information about that. Does this villain seem very difficult to defeat? Are we putting ourselves at risk? Do they seem easy to overcome? Is there an obvious reward for stopping them from doing the evil thing? Um, and they should be able to think a little bit about what might the consequences be if we don't interact, we don't intercede. Um, with the other option being, of course, to ignore, to move on, to run away, and not interact. But there should be some kind of logical consequence that the players can think about as they're making that choice. Again, we'll talk about consequences in just a second. The third type of NPC interaction that I mentioned were vendors. And vendors are not victims or villains. They are the classic kind of quest giver. There's a guy who just says, "Oh, if you're going into that dungeon, I hear there's a magic feather. If you get it for me, I will pay you a lot for it." And you say, "Okay, that seems fine." So again, it gives the players the option to either interact with this person, help them do what they want, presumably for a reward of some kind that they value, or not. Or maybe they just use that information and they say, "Well, what if we get that magic feather and we give it to someone else?" And they can begin maybe manipulating multiple vendors. These are people who are selling goods and services, who are just interacting with us in some kind of transactional business way. But again, it does give the players an informed way of making a choice of how to interact with the game space and how they're going to move forward with their adventuring choices. But again, with consequences. One other variation on the victims, villains, and vendors triad is that if you interact with more than one of them at the same time. So if you find a villain hurting a victim, or if you find two vendors who are trying to, get the same resources, wherever it may be, this gives the players the opportunity to take sides in an interaction with multiple people, so they can decide whether or not we're going to help the cops beat up this peasant, or are we going to help the peasant overcome the cops? What do we think is happening? Who do we think is right? Who do we think is wrong? We're going to pick a side or walk away. Walking away is always a choice, which does, of course, have its own consequences. But giving the players the opportunity to take sides is a very good and compelling and easy to understand interaction with NPCs. All right, so let's talk about consequences. We've talked about villains and victims and vendors and situations with multiple people. So our players can take sides. They can make a choice of how to interact with these NPCs. When they do so, the GM, using your adventure text, should be able to convey or telegraph in some way what the consequences will be uh, of each choice of helping or harming or interfering or walking away from this interaction. And that might be something it should always be logical. It should also always be somewhat straightforward and comprehensible. So it should obviously be, if we don't help this victim, they will die. And then maybe there's a second knock on effect. Well, if they die, the people who rely on them are going to be in trouble, or the people who rely on them are going to be mad at us because we didn't help. There should be some number of logical consequences of not helping the victim. In addition, same thing. If we don't stop this villain from doing their villainous plot, there should be logical consequences. If we don't stop these goblins from knocking down the bridge will fall down, and then we will not have the bridge that allows us to access, the far side of the gorge or whatever it may be. And that should be easily conveyed to the players through your adventure text. Maybe something as simple as a timeline of events that says, look, if you don't save this person from the burning building, in 1d6 minutes, the building collapses and they die. If you don't stop the goblins from knocking down this bridge, in 1d6 hours, the bridge collapses and you lose access to the far side. And maybe there can be some more notes that you provide in the description text of your adventure to the GM, something similar to the timeline that says, here are possible knock-on effects of if this happens or if that happens. For instance, if we stop the goblins, if we bribe them, if we just bribe them, if we convince them to leave and they go away, then you could say, look, they're going to come back in 1d6 days and restart trying to knock down this bridge because they're going to forget about you, or they'll stop being scared and they'll come back. On the other hand, if you kill the goblins so they can't come back, then your bridge will stay up for at least 3d6 days. But then a rival group of goblins is going to show up and they're going to try to knock down the bridge for whatever reason, because this is goblin-centric and bridge-centric adventure that you're creating. So you can just provide those very short descriptions, little sub bullets that just says, 1d6 days, goblins come back, 3d6 days, other goblins come back. So the GM who is running your adventure can easily start solving the problem of what happens if my players make choice A or choice B. And those choices should seem pretty straightforward to you as the writer. Either the players are going to involve themselves or not. And the most obvious type of interaction would be, they stop the bad guy, they save the victim, what have you. Easy things for you to predict and just describe in little sub bullets for the GM. This is probably what the effect would be if the players do task A or versus task B. And that allows the adventure space to evolve naturally and logically. But also you're taking, again, the work away from the GM. They don't have to do the labor of thinking through what are the effects of my players doing these crazy things. They have a little flow chart. They can easily say, oh, I see. I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm not worried about them hurting this villain or ignoring this villain. I know what happens next. I can plan ahead. I don't need to spend all night writing up, alternative text for me to play next week. This adventure has done it for me. The GM will be very grateful. They will think you did a very good job because you thought through how these interactions could play out, and you did the work for them. So again, for social choices, we want to think about interacting with victims, villains, and vendors. and think about what are the consequences of either becoming involved or not becoming involved, and what are the most likely next effects, or even the next two effects, and just very simply spell those out for the GM so they know how to play it, how to role play it, how to telegraph it to their players, so they can make informed choices. And I think the players will then feel that they had a lot of agency and that their choices had a meaningful impact and changed the adventure space in a way that was unique to them and their choices. Um, and that's probably the most important thing to create a very rich gaming experience. And I think that's about all for now. So good luck out there.